The billionaire had no idea he had a son until a struggling mom brought her little boy to a job interview. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear it. And if you're enjoying the content, give the video a like to help support the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Mia shifted her weight from one foot to the other as the elevator hummed its way up to the 28th floor. Leo clutched her hand tightly, his small fingers warm and a little sticky from the cereal bar he'd eaten in the cab. She'd wiped his face with a napkin, but a smudge still clung stubbornly to the corner of his mouth. Her other hand held her portfolio, thin but polished. The job posting hadn't even been public. A former colleague had slipped her the contact and told her the company was looking for someone discreet, capable, and willing to handle high-pressure media. The position was well above anything she'd applied to in years, but she had nothing to lose. The babysitter's cancellation had come at the worst possible moment, just as they were heading out the door. Mia had nearly cancelled the interview, but after checking the dwindling balance in her bank account and thinking about the rent notice pinned to the fridge, she'd decided she couldn't afford to miss this. She'd explained it as calmly as she could when they arrived, expecting to be turned away, but the receptionist had blinked, nodded politely, and directed her to wait. No one had scolded her. Some had glanced curiously. Others had offered tight-lipped smiles. She kept her voice low and tried to keep Leo occupied with colouring pages and a crumpled set of crayons she dug from her bag. He was quiet, observant, and good at reading the room in ways most 6-year-olds weren't. She hadn't realised just how high up she'd come until the elevator opened onto a floor with wall-to-wall glass windows, open office spaces, and the faint sound of soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. The air smelled like expensive coffee and fresh-cut flowers. Everything was too sleek, too modern, too deliberate. Leo tugged her sleeve and pointed at the massive screen on the far wall, showing a news ticker and rotating company stats. "That's a lot of numbers," he whispered. She nodded, too nervous to respond. A man in a tailored suit passed by, his pace brisk. He slowed just slightly when he noticed them. Carter Langston hadn't been planning to walk through the main floor at that hour. He usually avoided unnecessary interactions, but he'd left his phone in one of the shared conference rooms. As he approached the corner near the elevators, he noticed a woman standing with a child. She wasn't dressed like the guests they usually had. No designer shoes, no statement bag. The kid looked out of place, but comfortable, sitting cross-legged with a colouring book across his knees. Carter nearly walked past them until the boy looked up and said, "You look like Iron Man, but more tired." Carter stopped. Not because of the comment itself. He got compared to all sorts of people, often less flatteringly, but because the kid's voice had an odd ring to it. It wasn't just the tone, it was the timing, the rhythm, something about the way he said it that tugged at a part of Carter's memory he couldn't place. He stared for a moment longer than necessary before catching himself. The woman stood and smoothed her skirt, offering a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Carter nodded once and kept walking, but his mind was already working overtime. Mia didn't realize who he was until a few minutes later, when the receptionist whispered, "That was Mr. Langston," and gestured for her to follow someone down the hall. She straightened her blazer, instructed Leo to stay quiet and close, and walked behind the assistant into a glass-walled meeting room. There was no formal waiting, no handshake or preamble. Carter entered less than a minute later, with a tablet in one hand and a mug in the other. He didn't sit immediately. His eyes flicked to Leo, then back to Mia. "You're here for the communications role," he said. Not a question. "Yes, I'm Mia Harrington." She paused, debating whether to explain Leo's presence again. "This is my son, Leo. My sitter." "I was informed," he interrupted, waving it off. "Let's start." He didn't smile, didn't lean back, didn't attempt small talk. He fired off a question about her crisis management experience. She answered with a clear summary of the NGO scandal she'd helped cover years ago, one that had drawn national attention. He raised a brow. "Why aren't you still working in journalism?" She hesitated. "It stopped paying the bills." That was the cleaned-up version. The real answer involved layoffs, industry shifts, and the fact that people with ethics didn't seem to last long anymore. Carter watched her closely. She didn't fidget. She didn't oversell herself. When she spoke about strategy and messaging, her language was crisp, confident. It wasn't just rehearsed, it was grounded in actual experience. Still, he found himself losing focus, his attention drifting to the boy who now sat in a corner of the room with a small robot toy someone had loaned him from the desk outside. He was quiet, but Carter could hear the soft whir of the robot's gears and Leo's low murmur as he tested its movements. The kid was completely absorbed, not fidgeting or interrupting, not even glancing toward his mother. Mia paused, mid-sentence, noticing Carter's gaze. He seemed distracted. She couldn't tell if it was annoyance or something else. She pressed on, finishing her point about rebuilding public trust after internal leaks. "Do you usually bring your child to interviews?" he asked suddenly. "No," she said, matching his tone. "This was a last-minute exception. If it disqualifies me, I understand." He didn't answer that. Instead, he set the tablet down, finally sitting across from her. "I've interviewed 12 people for this position. Most of them have 10 more years of corporate PR than you. Then why am I here?" "I was curious," he said, glancing briefly at Leo. "Now I'm interested." Mia didn't respond. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a threat. "I'd like you to come back for a second round," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon. Bring updated writing samples. If you have availability next month, you'll need to prepare a mock campaign proposal as well." "I can do that," she said. "Thank you." He stood and gave her a half nod. Leo looked up and smiled at him. "Your robot has a broken sensor," he said, holding up the toy. "The left eye isn't blinking right." Carter blinked. "You figured that out just now?" Leo nodded. "It's a pattern thing." Mia gently pulled Leo's hand. "Come on, we're leaving." As they walked out, Carter stared after them. His heart was beating faster than it should have been, and not because of the interview. The boy's face, something about it itched at the edges of his memory. The timing didn't make sense. The woman's name. The way she'd looked at him when she realized who he was. He'd had enough conversations over the years with people pretending they didn't know him. This wasn't that. There was recognition behind her composure, and something else. He sat back down, but instead of reviewing the next applicant's file, he pulled up Mia's resume again and clicked through to her application photo. Then he opened an old folder, buried in a personal drive. A photo from a college party, dimly lit, blurry but clear enough to recognize the girl leaning on his arm. Same nose, same last name. The dates matched. He closed the tablet, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. Carter didn't get much work done after Mia left. The photo on her file wasn't recent, maybe a year or two old, but it was enough. The same sharp chin, the same way her hair curved slightly at the ends. When his assistant returned to ask if she should schedule the next candidate, he waved her off and told her to reschedule the afternoon entirely. Once alone again, he typed her full name into the internal database, skimming through her credentials, the modest list of jobs, and the tiny gaps that hinted at more than they revealed. "Mia Harrington," he muttered. as if saying it aloud would jar something loose. The last time he'd heard that name, he'd been 23, working late in a freezing off-campus co-working space, trying to get his first app functional before finals week. Mia had brought him coffee without asking, curled up on the worn couch with her laptop, writing some blistering editorial for the campus paper. They hadn't dated long, just a few months, but it had been intense in the way things sometimes are when both people know time is running out. He'd liked her, more than liked. And then, right before graduation, she disappeared. No fights, no explanations. One missed call, and then silence. He'd gone to her dorm, only to find it half empty. The RA said she'd left early to sort out family stuff. That was it. He hadn't thought about her in years, not in any real way. And now she was here, in his building, looking for work, standing in his office with a boy who had his ears and the same habit of tapping his fingers when concentrating. It wasn't confirmation. Not yet. But it was enough to start pulling threads. He emailed his assistant and asked for every scrap of her application paperwork, including references. Then he searched her name online. Her writing credits were scattered across small platforms, advocacy blogs, and non-profits. Smart work, underfunded, passionate. He found nothing about Leo's father. No social media posts that mentioned a partner, not even a vague allusion. If anything, it looked like she was raising the kid alone. That evening, while the rest of the building cleared out and the cleaning staff drifted in with carts and low conversations, Carter stayed late, hunched over his personal laptop. He opened a folder he hadn't touched in a long time, one with blurry college photos and startup screenshots from the earliest days. There she was, in a shot taken at a department mixer, wearing a faded denim jacket, head tilted, leaning against him on a threadbare couch. He stared at the image, longer than he meant to, then opened the calendar on his phone and counted backward. Leo was 6. 6 and change, by the look of it. The timeline was close, very close. He closed the folder and shut the laptop, sitting back in his chair. The usual late-night buzz, the hum of street traffic, the soft ping of cleaning supplies, felt distant. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel. Anger? Surprise? Regret? Mostly he felt unsettled, like someone had kicked open a door he didn't realize was locked. He grabbed his phone and typed out a message to his assistant. Schedule a final interview with Mia Harrington. Same time tomorrow. Ask her to bring Leo again. Say we're piloting a family forward initiative for candidates. He hesitated before hitting send, but only for a second. Mia, on the other hand, was finishing up a microwave dinner while Leo arranged plastic dinosaurs around a jungle of couch cushions and unfolded laundry. Her head still buzzed from the surreal pace of the day. She hadn't expected to make it past the first 5 minutes, not with Leo in tow. Yet, something had shifted in the room after Carter walked in. He'd been stern, but not cold, attentive, yet clearly distracted. She wondered if he'd recognized her. He hadn't said anything, but then again, she hadn't expected him to. Back then, he hadn't been Carter Langston, tech mogul. He'd been a restless guy in hoodies and cracked phone screens, running on espresso and stubbornness. She sat down across from Leo, watching him sort the dinosaurs by size. You know, you did really great today, she said. Even though I wasn't supposed to be there, he asked without looking up. Especially because of that, she said. You were calm. You were patient. That's not easy. He shrugged like it didn't matter, but his smile gave him away. Later, while Leo slept in the room they shared, Mia opened her laptop to check her email and found the invitation waiting. Final interview. Same time. And the note. If possible, bring your child again. We're reviewing how family dynamics impact workplace culture. She reread the sentence twice. It felt too specific to be random. Her stomach twisted. Maybe he had recognized her. Maybe this was a setup for a quiet rejection. Maybe it was curiosity. She didn't know which possibility unsettled her more. She stayed up late that night, thinking it through. If she got the job, it would mean real stability, benefits, a real salary, a chance to get off the hamster wheel of side gigs and retail shifts. But it also meant being visible again. To him, to people who might remember. Her old life was something she'd packed away on purpose. She couldn't afford for it to bleed into the one she'd built. The next morning, Carter arrived earlier than usual, already in his office before most of the team had even started their commute. He paced. He opened a few spreadsheets and didn't read them. The question kept looping in his mind. Why didn't she tell me? Maybe it wasn't his. Maybe this was a coincidence, a trick of genetics and timing. But if it wasn't, if Leo was his son, what then? He'd never imagined himself with a kid. He barely had time to manage his own life, let alone someone else's. Yet that moment in the hallway, when Leo pointed out the broken robot sensor like it was obvious, something about it stuck. By mid-morning, he'd decided he wouldn't ask. Not yet. He'd see how she handled the next meeting. He wanted to watch them together, observe the rhythm between them. Leo wasn't shy, but he wasn't loud either. There was a carefulness to the way he watched people that felt too familiar. Meanwhile, Mia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to decide whether to wear the same blazer or switch to something softer. She settled on the same. Consistency, if nothing else. Leo ate a quiet breakfast, sensing her tension but not commenting on it. As they rode the elevator up again, she felt her pulse quicken the higher the numbers ticked. When the doors opened and the assistant greeted her with the same unreadable smile, she took Leo's hand without even thinking. This time, Carter was already in the room, standing by the window. He turned as they entered and offered a slight nod. No warm greeting, but no tension either. She took the same seat as before. Leo settled into the corner, pulling out a toy car he'd brought this time. The sound of its tiny wheels on the floor filled the quiet. "We'll keep this brief," Carter said. "I've already reviewed your materials. This is more of a conversation than an assessment." Mia nodded, keeping her voice even. Of course. He didn't ask about her references or past employers. He asked about how she managed deadlines with a child at home, how she navigated professional boundaries under pressure, what kind of work made her feel most useful. She answered everything directly, watching for signs, an expression, a pause, a shift in tone, but he gave away nothing. Afterward, as she packed up, Carter stepped closer and crouched down near Leo. "Still fixing things?" Leo held up the toy. "This one's fine." "I see." He looked at Mia. "You'll hear from us within 2 days." Mia nodded. "Thank you for the opportunity." As they left, Carter stood at the window again, watching until they disappeared from view. He still wasn't sure, but he was getting closer. Carter watched them go again, just like before. Mia didn't glance back this time. She held Leo's hand, guiding him into the elevator with a kind of quiet efficiency, like she'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't seem nervous anymore, just guarded. Too calm, maybe. He'd seen people bluff through worse, but there was a stiffness to the way she carried herself that hadn't been there the first day. Like she was waiting for a question that never came. Back in his office, he paced. There was no longer much doubt in his mind. If Mia hadn't recognized him during the first interview, she definitely had the second time. He'd seen it in the slight pause when he mentioned something about deadlines at 22, in the way her mouth tightened at the corner when he asked if she'd ever had to rebuild trust with someone professionally. Her answers were smooth, but not quite relaxed. She hadn't asked him any questions either, not about the team, the culture, or expectations. She knew exactly who he was, and she was trying not to let it show. Later that evening, he pulled the offer letter template and filled it out himself. Senior Communications Advisor, flexible hours, full benefits, salary bumped well above the initial range. He clicked send without waiting for HR to review it. If they pushed back, he'd call it a strategic hire and move on. Mia opened the email while Leo was brushing his teeth. She stared at the numbers on the screen, then looked again. She'd expected a standard contract, something decent, maybe with a trial period. This was more than generous, and there it was in writing. Start date flexible, child-friendly scheduling possible. No mention of a trial. No conditions beyond the standard clauses. It felt intentional. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screen until Leo called out to her from the bathroom, asking where the blue towel went. She answered on autopilot. Later, after he was asleep, she walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. She'd avoided thinking about Carter for years. Back then, when everything had spiraled, her parents' debt, the eviction, the decision to leave school early, cutting him off, had felt like the cleanest option. He was about to launch his company, already working 18-hour days. She told herself he didn't need the distraction, that it would only complicate his life. And maybe, at the time, that was true. But now he was here again, with that same mix of intensity and silence, and it was clear he was thinking. He hadn't said anything directly, but something in the way he looked at Leo, like he was trying to connect dots that didn't quite line up, made her stomach twist. She accepted the job. Her first week was a blur. She was given a corner desk in the communications wing with a clean slate of projects and more autonomy than she'd expected. Carter didn't hover, but he made his presence felt. He checked in on her work discreetly, mostly through notes forwarded from department heads. He never stopped by unannounced, never pulled her into his office for updates. Still, she felt the pressure of being watched. Not in a hostile way, more like being studied. The third day in, Leo received a package at home with no note. It was a beginner robotics kit, top of the line, not cheap. She told herself it was a company perk, something from the family support initiative they'd vaguely referenced, but there was no branding, no message, no explanation. She didn't bring it up. A week later, another package arrived, this time with a child-sized hoodie embroidered with the company logo and Leo's name stitched into the sleeve. It was subtle but personal. Leo wore it constantly. At work, Carter remained professional. He nodded in the halls, asked brief, relevant questions during team meetings, and once forwarded her a note that read, "Good work on the press draft." Clean tone. It was signed with just a C. No one else on the team got personal notes from him. Still, it wasn't enough to raise suspicions yet. On Friday afternoon, she was invited to a small executive luncheon held for department leads and new hires. It was supposed to be casual, a meet and greet. Carter was late. When he arrived, he barely acknowledged her, settling instead into a conversation about Q3 projections. She played it safe, answering a few questions when prompted, smiling politely when someone asked about Leo's school. Carter glanced over only once, but that was enough. She caught it. That look again, not just curious, but searching. That weekend, Leo asked where the robot kit came from. She paused, then said, it must have been from her new job, maybe something the company sent. He seemed satisfied with that. Then he asked, "Do you think that guy who looks like Iron Man sent it?" She didn't answer right away. Why would you think that? Because he looked at me like he knew me. Her chest tightened. He probably just thought you were cool. Leo nodded, distracted already by the robot's new program he'd written himself. She watched him for a long moment, then went into the other room and closed the door. Carter spent that weekend in his apartment, ignoring the usual invites and check-ins. He ordered takeout, opened an old notebook from his college years, and flipped through a few pages. At the time, he'd used it to map out every hour of his day, class schedules, coding hours, networking events. Mia had been penciled in every other page: lunches, library meets, late-night talks on the quad. There was even a line he remembered writing the night they'd last seen each other. Mia equals calm before the storm. It felt overly dramatic now. Then again, most things from your early 20s did. But none of that explained why she'd never told him. If Leo really was his, then why the secrecy? Why take a job at his company now, after all this time? Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe she really hadn't known he was here, but she hadn't looked surprised either. She'd looked ready. He asked himself if he wanted to know the truth. It was easy to pretend he didn't, but every time he saw Leo, even just in passing, he felt something pull. The kid was sharp, patient, unbothered by grown-up awkwardness. Too observant for his age, just like he'd been. By the end of the month, Carter had authorized another round of gifts for employee families, movie vouchers, tickets to a science museum, even a few personalized items for staff with children. All under the company's new employee support initiative. No one questioned it. HR called it a smart PR move. Mia accepted the packages politely, thanked whoever dropped them off, and said nothing. But the silence was wearing thin. Carter knew he couldn't keep dancing around the question forever, and Mia, despite her best efforts, was starting to look over her shoulder a little too often. The gifts kept coming, not daily, not in any showy way, but consistently enough that Mia started marking the calendar when something new arrived. A software subscription Leo had once mentioned in passing, a limited edition puzzle kit, a personalized welcome letter from the tech museum that looked suspiciously handwritten. She stopped asking who sent them. The return addresses were always company-related, but the timing never felt random. Neither did the quiet notes from HR about how the company was proud to support working parents, and the suspicious way Carter's assistant always seemed to know when Leo had a school event coming up, even when Mia hadn't mentioned it. She tried to focus on work. The projects were engaging, the team competent, and for the first time in years, she felt respected. Still, there was an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. Carter was too quiet. He didn't pull her into unnecessary meetings, but she could feel his presence in the corners of things, in how certain approvals came faster for her, how her department's budget got extended without discussion. At first, she told herself it was guilt. Maybe he'd figured out just enough to suspect, but not confront. Or maybe he hadn't connected the dots at all and was just being generous. That hope lasted exactly until the science fair. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been routine. Mia had taken a long lunch to see Leo's presentation. He'd built a model of a Martian rover using scrap electronics and a cereal box. He was excited in the quiet, focused way he got when something really mattered. She'd helped with the glue and the labels, but the wiring had been all him. She stood in the crowded elementary school gym with the other parents, clutching her coffee and smiling when appropriate, letting Leo do the talking. And then she saw Carter. He stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, watching the presentations with a polite smile. Not out of place exactly, he looked too put together to draw attention, but she felt her stomach sink all the same. He wasn't wearing a visitor badge, hadn't signed the parent sheet, and didn't acknowledge her until their eyes met. When he did, he gave a small, casual nod, the kind people use when pretending not to know each other well. She waited until Leo was deep in conversation with one of the judges, then crossed the gym and stopped a foot from him. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting one of our team members," he said, keeping his tone light. "We have a couple of employees with kids at this school." "Not in Leo's class," she said. He didn't deny it, just shrugged. "I heard about the fair, thought it'd be interesting." "You don't do casual interest," she said, quieter now. "You're following him." "I'm observing," he replied. "It's not the same thing." "You had no right," she said. "You can't just show up like this." "I wasn't disruptive," he said. And then, almost too softly, "He built that rover himself?" She didn't answer. She walked away instead. The next day at the office, she noticed the shift. It started with the glances, colleagues hesitating a moment longer when she passed, stopping their conversations mid-sentence. One of the junior associates, a woman from HR, who usually chatted about daycare logistics and school lunches, went silent the moment Mia joined the break room. Even Carter's assistant, usually neutral and robotic, gave her a look that lingered half a second too long. By Thursday, she found a copy of a gossip blog printed out and left on her desk. It was an old post, dated years back, referencing Carter Langston's mystery girlfriend from his pre-fame college days. No names, just speculation. But someone had underlined a line about a journalism student who dropped off the grid after graduation. Mia folded it in half and threw it away without reacting. That evening, her inbox pinged with a message from a blocked address. The subject line read, "Confirmation?" The body was short, 3 sentences. "Sources say you and Langston were involved in college. Some believe Leo is his son. I'm running a story this week. Care to comment?" She didn't respond. She deleted it, cleared her trash folder, then sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the dark screen. Leo was asleep in the next room, still wearing the hoodie with his name on the sleeve. She couldn't breathe properly for several minutes. If it leaked, if the story came out, her life would split in 2 again. She had no power here, not anymore. The stress hit harder than she expected. 2 days later, Leo woke up feverish and pale. She kept him home from school, but by the afternoon he was shaking and couldn't keep food down. She bundled him into a cab and took him to the ER, heart pounding the whole way. The hospital was overrun. She had to argue to get a bed. The nurse recognized her from the company badge, clipped to her bag, and waved her through, more sympathetic than she expected. He was diagnosed with a viral infection. Not serious, but enough to require observation. She sat beside him in the narrow hospital cot, holding his hand while he slept off the fever. At some point, she dozed off, forehead against the side rail. When she woke, Carter was there. He stood at the foot of the bed, coat still on, hands in his pockets. He didn't speak right away, just looked at Leo, who was still asleep, cheeks flushed from the fever. Mia sat up slowly. "How did you even know?" "I called your desk. Your team said you were out. I asked around. Someone in HR mentioned your kid was sick. I tracked the rest." She stared at him, too tired to fight. "You shouldn't be here." "I don't care," he said. "Is he going to be okay?" "It's a virus. They're keeping him overnight to monitor dehydration." He nodded. "Good." She looked at him for a long moment. "You need to stop." "Stop what?" "Showing up, sending things. Watching him like you're trying to decide something. Just say it. Ask me what you want to ask." Carter didn't speak immediately. Then he looked directly at her and said, "Is he mine?" The silence stretched too long. Mia felt the blood rush to her head, her mouth dry. She stood up, adjusted Leo's blanket. "It doesn't change anything. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." He took that in, stepped back slightly, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and left without another word. Mia barely slept that night. She stayed by Leo's side, awake through the beeping monitors and fluorescent silence, watching his breathing rise and fall. The nurse checked on them every few hours and offered water and extra blankets, but Mia hardly moved. Her thoughts were stuck in the hallway, outside Leo's hospital room, in the question Carter had asked, and the look on his face when she refused to answer. The door he'd opened couldn't be closed again, and she knew it. Whether she wanted to or not, she'd let him see too much. Leo was discharged the next morning with a printed list of recovery instructions and a bottle of electrolyte solution he refused to drink unless it was chilled and had a straw. Mia took him home, called out sick from work for the rest of the week, and did her best to carry on like things were normal, but they weren't. Leo asked about Carter almost immediately. "Is he mad at me?" he said on the second night, curled up on the couch beside her with a blanket and a stack of books. She told him no, that he'd just been busy. Leo didn't believe it. He asked why Carter hadn't called, why he hadn't sent another kit or game, or even just a message. "I think he liked talking to me," he said. Mia had no response. By the weekend, the silence was too much. She sent Carter a message asking to meet somewhere off-site, not at work, not with Leo. He replied with a single word: "Tomorrow." They met at a park across the river, public enough to avoid spectacle, quiet enough for a conversation neither of them wanted to have. Carter was already there when she arrived, sitting on a bench beneath a patchy oak tree that hadn't turned for fall yet. She sat down slowly, leaving a full space between them. "I owe you the truth," she said without preamble. "We were together. You remember that much." "I remember everything," he said. "Then you know it wasn't supposed to end like that. I left fast. Too fast. You didn't do anything wrong. I just couldn't handle everything at once." He didn't say anything. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after graduation. My parents were barely holding it together. I had no job, and you were, well, you were you, already sprinting toward whatever came next. You decided for both of us. I was 22. You were building a company. You didn't have space in your life for a baby. I told myself I was protecting you. That's not what you were doing." "No," she admitted. "I was protecting myself. From what you'd say. From what it would mean." He sat with that for a long moment, then turned slightly toward her. "Do you know what I would have said?" She didn't answer. "I would have been scared. I would have said stupid things, but I would have shown up. I would have tried. You didn't even give me the chance to be there." She looked away. "You had no right to keep him from me. You had no right to build a company on 20-hour days and think you'd make a good father. I didn't get to try. I didn't think you'd want to. That wasn't your call." The silence after that settled thick between them. People walked by with coffee and dogs and strollers, and for a few minutes it was just the sound of city noise filling the space they couldn't. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for everything. But I'm not sorry I raised him the way I did. He's a good kid." "I know he is," Carter said. "I can see that." They sat for a while longer. He didn't ask to see Leo. She didn't offer. When they finally stood, Carter said he'd be in touch. Mia didn't know what that meant. The next morning, she received a formal message from HR saying she'd been placed on a 2-week leave of absence, citing scheduling conflicts and internal review. She knew immediately that it had come from Carter. She didn't fight it, She packed up her desk that afternoon while most of the office was at lunch and left without saying goodbye. Leo asked about Carter every day that week. Mia deflected until she couldn't. "Sometimes adults need space," she said, "to figure things out." "Did he get mad at you?" "Maybe, but it's not your fault." Leo stared at his untouched cereal. "It feels like it is." She didn't correct him fast enough. At the company, Carter kept his head down. He buried himself in development meetings, data reviews, and investor calls, but his mind wasn't on any of it. His assistant had to remind him twice to review the quarterly report. He sent incomplete messages, missed deadlines he never used to forget. People started noticing. The mood around him shifted, small comments, subtle hesitations during board meetings. His CTO pulled him aside and asked if everything was fine at home. Carter didn't answer. He couldn't bring himself to say what was wrong, not when he still wasn't sure how to say it out loud. He went to his sister's place the following Sunday. Her kids ran wild in the backyard while they sat on her porch with warm mugs and awkward silence. She waited until he looked up from his untouched coffee. "She was someone from college," he said. "Mia." His sister nodded slowly. "She had a kid. Didn't tell me. He's 6. "And?" "He's mine." "You sure?" "I don't need a test. I know." She leaned back in her chair. "And what? You're angry?" "I'm lost." "Because she didn't tell you?" "Because I missed everything." His first words, first steps, the first time he got sick, school plays, all of it. She let that hang for a moment. "I get being mad," she said. "But you think he knows any of that? The kid? He just knows you showed up and then stopped. You want to be angry, fine, but don't take it out on a 6-year-old who's waiting for you to come back." Carter didn't respond. He watched her kids dart around the yard and felt something knot in his chest. "You can't punish a child for an adult's mistakes," she said. "You either show up or you don't. That's the whole job." That night, he sat in his apartment with Leo's drawing still taped to his fridge. A cartoon version of the rover they'd seen at the science fair. Leo had written in block letters underneath, "To Mr. Carter from Leo. No mention of Dad, no expectations, just a gift." Carter stared at it for a long time and tried to figure out how to start again. Carter kept a low profile for the next week, working remotely, showing up to the office only when necessary. He hadn't seen Leo since the hospital. Not a word from Mia either. Every morning, he'd start reading emails, scroll through unread project threads, and then lose his focus completely somewhere between the 5th and 10th message. He tried to pour himself into the job, but something always pulled him back to the memory of Leo's voice, or the way Mia had looked when she finally told him the truth. It wasn't just the time lost, it was the distance he couldn't close, the damage that had already settled in. Still, he'd made the decision to give her space. What else was there to do? It might have stayed quiet longer if the story hadn't broken when it did. The headline popped up just before noon on a Friday. Carter's assistant brought it to him in person. No one wanted to risk forwarding it. A digital tabloid, known more for spin than substance, had posted a photo-heavy exposé titled "CEO's Secret Love Child. New employee has past ties to Langston and a 6-year-old surprise." The front image was a blurry but recognizable shot of Carter outside the hospital, standing at the foot of Leo's bed, his coat still on. Another showed Mia holding Leo's hand near the elevator at headquarters. The caption underneath made no attempt at subtlety. "Sources confirm child is Langston's biological son." Carter didn't say anything at first. He clicked through the article, noting every incorrect claim, every speculative line wrapped in manipulative phrasing. They hadn't gotten the timeline right. They didn't have any direct quotes. But the photos were enough. The damage would spread quickly. He called legal, then PR, then the board chair. Within the hour, 3 emergency meetings had been set, and the office was buzzing with half-muttered questions. Mia found out from a neighbour. She was making lunch for Leo when her phone started vibrating non-stop. Calls from unknown numbers, a few messages from co-workers, then her neighbour calling from the grocery store with the words she hadn't prepared for. "You're on the internet." The article had already been reposted across multiple sites by the time she sat down to read it. She stared at the photos, at her name printed in bold next to Carter's, and felt a hollow chill spread across her chest. The comment section was worse. Strangers speculating about her intentions, her relationship with Carter, the boy they'd only seen in pixels. She closed the laptop and called the school. "He's staying home Monday," she said before the secretary could even ask who was speaking. That afternoon, the board voted without hesitation. Mia was terminated effective immediately for undisclosed violations of internal policy. No explanation, no warning, just a single email with her dismissal and a brief note about her severance being under review. Her keycard was deactivated within the hour. Carter found out half an hour later. He was still in a video call with PR when someone knocked on the door to say Mia had been fired. He ended the call, walked straight to the executive floor, and demanded a meeting. The board insisted it was necessary. "There's too much risk." She lied on her application. She didn't disclose a prior relationship with the CEO. "She didn't apply to be my partner," Carter said. "She applied to write press releases. She brought a child into the workplace, your child, and never disclosed it. You expect shareholders to ignore that?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Because they were right, by their logic at least. The media storm was picking up speed, and the company's name was now attached to a scandal no one had prepared for. The board gave him a choice: step down voluntarily or be removed. Either way, they planned to issue a statement by Monday. They called it damage control. Carter called it something else in his head, but didn't say it aloud. That night, Leo didn't want to go outside. He said someone at school had called him CEO boy and asked if he was rich now. Another student said their mum read that Leo's mum was a liar. Mia had to walk away to keep from crying in front of him. She came back with his favourite blanket and sat with him on the couch until he fell asleep. Afterward, she went to the kitchen and stared at the sink for a long time. Everything she'd been afraid of was happening, and faster than she'd imagined. The job was gone. Her reputation was shot. Her son had been pulled into a mess she'd tried for years to avoid, and Carter hadn't called. Except he had, she just hadn't answered. Not the texts, not the voicemails. He'd sent one that morning. "Let me fix this." She didn't believe he could. The next day, she turned on the television without thinking and saw him standing behind a podium. The company logo sat behind him, crisp and staged. Microphones crowded the table. Reporters murmured to one another, pens poised. Carter cleared his throat once before speaking. "I won't take questions. I'll keep this brief." Mia reached for the remote, then stopped. The story that was published yesterday includes both truth and speculation. I'm not here to correct the timeline. I'm here to confirm one thing. He looked directly at the camera. The child in those photos is my son. His name is Leo. I didn't know about him until recently. His mother never once asked for help, money, or recognition. She raised him on her own. She's worked harder than anyone I know. There was a stir from the press table. "I've made mistakes," Carter continued. But none of them include turning my back on my child. Not now, not again. If there's blame to place it on me." He stepped back without waiting for applause or response. PR tried to follow up with a statement, but the story was already rewriting itself in real time. Blogs updated their headlines. Social media shifted from gossip to commentary on vulnerability and responsibility. Some people called it brave, others called it calculated, but either way, the tone changed. That evening, the board met again. Carter was offered a leave of absence instead of forced resignation. The language was framed as a personal sabbatical to allow him to prioritize family. Public support was climbing by the hour. Investors cooled their panic. Mia sat on the edge of the bed and watched the clip twice. She still didn't know if she trusted him, but she hadn't expected that speech. She hadn't expected him to take all the heat, to clear her name without dragging her through another round of attention. Leo shuffled into the room mid-broadcast and climbed up beside her. He leaned on her shoulder and said, "That's my blanket he was talking about, huh?" She smiled, then kissed his hair. "Yeah, I think it was." The next time Mia opened her door and saw Carter standing there were no microphones, no cameras, no script. Just him, holding a small bag of groceries in one hand and a slightly unsure look on his face. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched long enough for her to wonder if she should step aside or shut the door. "I brought apples," he said finally. Leo mentioned liking the green ones. "I wasn't sure if you had any." She didn't know what answer he expected, but she opened the door wider and let him in. It had been 4 days since the press conference. The noise was already starting to settle, the story replaced by newer scandals and faster outrage cycles. Still, their lives had shifted. People recognized her face now, sometimes paused when she walked past with Leo at the grocery store. Most didn't say anything, but a few did, some kind, some too curious, some asking questions no stranger should. Carter stepped inside, awkward at first, setting the bag on the kitchen counter like he'd done it 100 times before. He glanced around, maybe expecting a grand speech or confrontation. She gave him neither. Leo appeared in the hallway a moment later, pajamas wrinkled, toothbrush still in hand. He looked at Carter, then at Mia, then walked over and hugged him like it was normal. That, more than anything, undid her. They sat around the kitchen table while Leo finished brushing his teeth and climbed into bed. Carter asked if he could come by the next day. Mia didn't say yes right away. She laid out conditions, no surprises, no media, no overnight stays, no gifts that hadn't been discussed. If he wanted to be part of Leo's life, it would be consistent, not convenient. He nodded through all of it. He came by again the next day, and the day after that. At first, the time they spent together was brief and cautious. Weekend afternoons at the park, trips to the bookstore, pizza on the living room floor. Carter wasn't sure how to parent, but he paid attention. He asked questions. He didn't try to win Leo over with toys or grand promises. He showed up, and he stayed. It took a while, but the rhythm settled into something that almost resembled normal. Leo relaxed around him. His jokes got bolder, his questions got sharper. One evening, while Carter was helping him build a cardboard solar system for school, Leo casually called him "my dad's friend" to another kid on a video call. The words made Carter pause, smile, then return to taping string around Saturn's rings. Mia stayed on the edges of those moments. She watched the connection grow, felt the weight lift slightly as Leo laughed more, slept better, didn't ask about Carter's absence anymore. But she kept her distance too. She didn't let herself hope too much. Not yet. Then Carter bought a house in their neighborhood. He didn't announce it with fanfare. He didn't even tell her directly. She found out when Leo came running in from school, shouting that Mr. Carter was moving 2 blocks away, and could they ride their bikes there this weekend? When she confronted him, he shrugged and said he wanted to be closer, that commuting across the city every time he wanted to see his son felt wrong. She told him it was a lot. He said he understood. She wasn't sure if he did. But he didn't push further. He moved in quietly, furnished the place himself, kept the decor simple. Leo helped him unpack a few boxes and insisted on putting the cereal in the lowest cabinet, so it's fair. Carter let him. Over the next few months, the shared parenting settled into something steadier. They divided school pickups, took turns, attending parent-teacher meetings. On weekends, Leo bounced between both homes as if he'd done it forever. Mia found herself less tense around Carter, though she still kept lines drawn in her head. She didn't want to be swept into something she couldn't hold together. Affection flickered between them sometimes, but she held back. She remembered how fast things could fall apart. The fundraiser changed something. It was a small event at Leo's school, craft tables, homemade baked goods, kids performing songs off-key and out of rhythm. Mia volunteered at the raffle booth while Carter sat near the front with Leo. Halfway through a group number, the microphone cut out and the room dissolved into laughter. Someone fixed it. The kids picked up mid-verse, and in the middle of it all, Leo turned to Carter and said loudly enough for the people around them to hear, "Dad, did you bring your camera?" There was no pause. No second guessing. Carter froze for half a second, then nodded. "Yeah, it's in my bag." The woman beside him smiled. Someone clapped absent-mindedly. The word echoed louder in Carter's chest than the room seemed to notice. Mia watched from across the auditorium. She caught the look on Carter's face. Small, quiet, not performative. Not pride exactly, just something real. She didn't know what to call it, but it sat heavy in her chest, the kind of weight that didn't hurt, but wouldn't leave either. Later, while cleaning up folding chairs, she saw him standing near the exit, waiting for her. He didn't try to come over, just waited. She walked up, tossed a bundle of napkins into a trash bin, and stood next to him for a moment before speaking. "He called you Dad. I didn't expect that. I could tell." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't know it could feel like that. Just a word, but yeah." She nodded, silent for a beat. Then she asked, "You ready to keep showing up for it?" "I'm not going anywhere." Mia didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. It was late spring when Carter brought up the idea of the trip. They were standing in Mia's kitchen, going over Leo's school calendar. The upcoming break was circled in red marker on a flyer she'd pinned to the fridge weeks ago, half thinking they might use it to visit her sister in Vermont. Carter ran a finger along the dates, then looked over and asked if they'd consider going somewhere quiet instead. Just the 3 of us, no business, no schedules, somewhere with sand and nothing else. He didn't push beyond that. He just waited. Mia didn't give him an answer right away, but 3 days later, she sent a text with one word, yes. He replied with an address and a smiley face Leo had taught him to use. The coastal town he picked wasn't the kind people posted about online. No trendy hotels or curated brunch spots, just a row of cottages along the shore and a small grocery store that closed early every evening. The air smelled like salt and old wood. The beach was more rocks than powdery sand, but Leo loved it anyway. He spent the first 2 hours collecting broken shells and sorting them by colour, narrating the whole process like a nature show. Their cottage was small, just 2 bedrooms and a porch with a view of the water. Carter had picked it for that porch. He said it looked like somewhere people might finally stop moving. They spent their days without a plan. Walks on the beach, pancakes with too much syrup, Leo drawing elaborate castles in the sand with crooked towers and uneven moats. At night, they watched old movies on a scratched-up DVD player, and Leo fell asleep halfway through every time. It wasn't perfect. The water heater went out once. A raccoon got into the garbage. Leo scraped his knee on the first day and limped around like he'd lost a limb, but it was real in a way none of them had expected. No press, no stories, no whispers from strangers. Just the three of them figuring out how to be near each other without waiting for it to fall apart. One morning, Carter and Mia took a walk while Leo stayed behind building a defensive sand fort with a plastic shovel and a bucket he insisted on calling a construction rig. They walked without speaking for a while, the sound of the waves filling the gaps. Carter kicked a piece of driftwood out of the way and finally said, "I used to come to places like this in my head, when things were bad growing up. I'd close my eyes and imagine somewhere open, quiet, somewhere no one was yelling." Mia slowed her pace. "You never talked much about your childhood. There's not much worth sharing." He shrugged. "My mom tried. My dad didn't. I think I learned early not to expect much from people. I used to think being alone was safer. You can't be disappointed if there's no one to let you down." She looked out at the water, not speaking. "But then Leo happened," he said. "And it's like everything rewired. I don't want space anymore. I don't want safe. I just want him to know he matters." "You're doing that," she said. He stopped walking. "I also want you to know something." She turned toward him slowly. "I didn't fall in love with some idea of you from college. This version of you, who you are now, this is the person I love. It's not about the past, not about making something up to you. I'm here because I want to be. Not because I feel like I owe you, or him, or anyone else." She didn't answer right away. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "You can tell me if I'm pushing too far." She shook her head, not quickly, but like it took effort. "I've been scared, Carter. Not just of you, of everything. When I left, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I thought if I stayed, I'd watch you drift away, piece by piece, and that would have been worse." "You still think I'll disappear?" "I don't know. I want to believe you won't. But I've built my whole life on expecting people to go. I'm not going." She looked at him then, finally letting the weight drop from her shoulders. "I never stopped loving you," she said, "even when I tried." He didn't say anything back right away. He just stepped forward and kissed her, slow and careful, like he wasn't sure how many years had been hiding between them until now. She kissed him back. They didn't hear Leo approaching until he shouted something from behind them, muffled by the wind. They turned to see him waving both arms in the air, feet covered in sand. "I built a castle," he shouted. "But this time, it's for our whole family." Mia laughed, wiping her face before Leo could see anything too much. They walked back together, hand in hand, not saying anything else. The sandcastle was lopsided and already starting to collapse, but Leo didn't seem to care. He dragged them closer, pointing out where each tower belonged and who would sleep where. "You two get this big one," he said, "and I'll have the short tower so I can look out for sea monsters." Carter crouched beside him. "Sounds like a good plan." As the sun dipped lower, casting the beach in gold and orange, the three of them sat down in the sand. No one moved to go inside. No one asked what came next. Whatever it was, they'd figure it out from here, together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps out the channel. And if you want more heartwarming and emotional stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this one. I'd love to hear your reactions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.